So today I want to go over an updated version of the Druid Tornado build for Season 1 of Diablo 4. Now the biggest change with this build compared to my last version of this build is some pretty massive undocumented changes to the Barber Heart with the most recent patch. Now these changes allow most effects in the game to now interact and work correctly with the Barber. So before this patch, basically any lucky hit wouldn't work with the Barber, and a bunch of other non-lucky hit effects also wouldn't work with the Barber. But it seems that now all of those effects will work with the Barber. So some of the biggest changes with this version is being able to use all those incredibly strong lucky hit effects and actually have them proc like normal. And actually it seems you're getting a lot more lucky hit procs while using the Barber than you would previously. So next up we have our skill tree, starting with our generator. I'm using Wind Shear. It's a ranged generator, so it's just generally much easier to use. Upgrade 1 has a chance to cause enemies to become vulnerable. You can also use Storm Strike if you want the damage reduction, but I think the range generator is just much easier to use. Then 5 points into Tornado, our main damage dealer. Upgrade 1 has a chance to spawn additional tornadoes. Upgrade 2 tornadoes can now cause enemies to become vulnerable. Then we're going down taking Cyclone Armor, non-physical damage reduction, and then when we activate it, it knocks all enemies back. Upgrade 1 slows enemies when we knock them back. Upgrade 2 gives us a damage reduction every 10 seconds. Then we're using Blood Howl, which is just a really big heal. Upgrade 1 reduces the cooldown for every kill. Upgrade 2 gives us 15% increased attack speed for 4 seconds. And with this attack speed, we're going to want to be using Blood Howl anytime it's off cooldown to keep that attack speed up. Then we're going down 1 into Hurricane, a decent AoE. Upgrade 1 slows enemies. Upgrade 2 causes enemies to deal less damage. And even though Hurricane can deal decent AoE damage, it's primarily to apply other effects. Then we're going down taking Grisly Rage, one of the most important parts of the build. Upgrade 1 makes you unstoppable for 6 seconds. Upgrade 2 fortifies you every second it's active. And one of the biggest changes with this version of the build is we are now able to use Earthern Might with the Barber, and this does seem to proc quite a lot more with the Barber because it can proc like normal when just dealing damage to targets when the Barber effect is on them, but then when they explode and do that crit at the end, that can also proc Earthern Might. And Earthern Might is a lucky hit that when it procs, it restores all of your spirit, causes all your attacks to be crits for 5 seconds, and the chance for it to proc is increased by 10% for crits or if the target is CC'd. And even though the Barber's damage proc is a guaranteed crit, whenever this procs and gives all of our attacks crit for 5 seconds, that is still calculating into the damage being built up on the Barber. So we're not actually losing anything when this procs, even though the Barber is always a crit at the end. And then next up we have our passives. Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulses. Your core skills deal more damage but cost more spirit. 3 into Predatory Instinct for increased critical strike damage against close enemies. 3 into increased movement speed while in Werewolf. Then we're going down taking Ancestral Fortitude to get 3 into Vigilance damage reduction after we use a defensive, and because of how many resets we get on Blood Howl, this should be up a majority of the time. Then we're going down 1 into Elemental Exposure, another lucky hit that can cause enemies to become vulnerable. 2 into Endless Tempest, increase the duration of Hurricane, and then 3 into Bad Omen, another lucky hit that's a 30% chance with damaging a vulnerable or CC'd enemy. You spawn a lightning bolt that'll hit an additional enemy, and with how this build works with us grouping up enemies, these lightning bolts can actually do quite a lot of damage. Then we're going down 3 into Neurotoxin to slow enemies that are poisoned. This will help us kite, especially when you're doing higher content. 1 into Toxic Claws, so werewolf crits will poison enemies. We don't care about the poison damage itself, we just care that they are poisoned. Then 3 into Envenom. You and companions have increased critical strike damage, also have 3 on our necklace for a total of 60% damage. Then 3 into Defiance. Nature skills deal increased damage to elites. We're also keeping 1 into Circle of Life, so skills that consume spirits or a tornado heal you for 1% of your max life. We have a lot more healing because Lucky Hit works now, but I still want to keep 1 point into this because we spam tornadoes so much that it still gives quite a lot of healing. Then 1 into Defensive Posture, 1 into Nature's Resolve to get 3 into Unrestrained, reduce CC effects on you by 9%, triple if you have Fortify over 50% of your max life. This will be tripled most of the time, so 27% CC reduction. This is primarily because the Unstoppable from Grisly Rage was so heavily nerfed, so we want CC reductions so we're not just spam CC'd at all times. And then next up we have our Spirit Boons, Advantageous Beast to reduce the cooldown of CC by an additional 15%, Swooping Attacks increase our attack speed by 10%, Calamity to extend the duration of our Grisly Rage by 25%, and one of the biggest changes is we're now able to use Masochistic again, which is a lucky hit. Critical strikes with shape-shifting skills have up to a 75% chance to heal you for 3% of your max life, and because our lucky hit now works correctly with the Barber, this will be proccing a ton for a ton of additional healing. Then Calm Before the Storm, which is another lucky hit. Nature skills have have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. You'll notice this a lot more with these changes, and if you're in combat the entirety of the time you're in Grizzly Rage, you can commonly have Grizzly Rage up again right after using it. And then next up we have our Paragon boards, and I'm primarily going to be going over our board and glyph selection, but I'll have a link in the description to a build planner if you want to follow along point by point. On our first board, we're using the werewolf glyph, increased damage while on werewolf, and damage reduction while on werewolf. Then the first board we're taking is Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 spirit, you deal increased damage for 5 seconds. Then the glyph we're taking is the Spirit glyph, gives you increased critical strike damage. Then critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you by 2% up to 12%. And it's actually got a pretty big buff. It used to be only crit damage with core skills, now it's just all crit damage. Then we're going up and taking the Thunderstruck board. Storm skills deal 30% increased critical strike damage against vulnerable or immobilized enemies, and the glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, which will give us some increased storm skill damage and some damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, which is actually pretty important. Then nature skills deal 10% increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. But one of the main reasons you take glyphs like this is so you can put points into the dexterity or intelligence nodes, which at max rank will give you 17 to that stat for a singular point, so you can much more easily get the secondary effects of rare nodes throughout your boards, which will give you a pretty big power increase. Then we're going over to the right, we're taking the Inner Beast board, but we're not taking the node itself, and then we're taking the Exploit glyph, which we primarily want for the secondary effect. When you damage an enemy, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds, has a 20-second cooldown per enemy, but this means that the first time you damage any enemy, they become vulnerable. This will massively increase our burst, and one of the big reasons we're taking this board specifically is because we can get the rare and magic nodes that gives us increased attack speed. So this is a pretty massive increase to attack speed just from these handful of points. Then we're going back down and going over to the right, we're taking the Lust for Carnage board. Now in my last version of this build, I didn't actually put the points into this, but I do think the build is just much more consistent. So we took out some other damage nodes to get Lust for Carnage. I think this is generally just going to be a lot more smooth of a build. And again, just like the last board we went over, we also get increased attack speed with this rare and magic nodes here as well. So a massive amount of increased attack speed. And also because of the order I did my Paragon boards, I'm not able to get the secondary effect of this rare node, which would give me another 2.5% attack speed. It may be better to do this earlier on so you can get that secondary effect, but either way, it's probably not going to make that big of a deal. And the glyph we're using is Undaunted, massively increased damage while fortified, and then damage reduction while fortified. And this is one of the biggest damage increases for any of the glyphs. Then finally, we're going down to taking the Heightened Malice node. While there are 3 or more poison enemies nearby, you deal 45% increased damage. And like a lot of these other nodes, this is multiplicative, so this is one of the strongest legendary nodes in the entirety of the game. And then next up, we have our uniques and our legendary aspects, starting off with Tempest Roar. This is the only unique you need for this build. Storm skills have up to a 25% chance to grant Force Spirit. The primary reason we're using this is your base storm skills are now also werewolf skills, so we can use all of our storm skills while in Grizzly Rage, and they get a ton of additional scaling. But the most important legendary aspect of this build is Grizzly Rage shapeshifts you into a dire werewolf, and this gives you movement speed instead of damage reduction. But the primary reason we're using this is you gain up to 75% spirit cost reduction, meaning you can basically infinitely spam tornadoes while in Grizzly Rage. And because of our other spirit generation, we only need this on a necklace instead of needing a 2-handed weapon for it. And then to go along with one of the bigger changes of this version of the build, your Earthen Might Key passive also applies to your storm skills, which is our capstone for this version of the build. So now all of our storm skills can also proc it. Then the duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by 5 seconds. Critical strikes in Grizzly Rage increase our critical strike damage. This can give you around 1000% increased critical strike damage, one of the biggest damage increases of the entire build. Then on our gloves, tornadoes will seek up to 3 targets. This just gives some targeting to our tornadoes, making them much easier to use. Then on our weapon, critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by up to 25% for 5 seconds. This will be procced all the time while in combat. And then finally, your core skills deal up to 40% increased multiplicative damage based on your fortify, so just another massive damage increase. Then on our chest, we have damage reduction while in werewolf. On our legs, we have disobedience, which is percentage armor stacking, still one of the strongest defensive aspects in the game. And then on our boots, while Hurricane is active, gain +2 ranks to shape shifting skills, which basically means all of our skills, but you can use any utility effect you want here. You can use the aspect that gives you increased movement speed off critical strikes. You can use the aspect that gives you increased movement speed off unstoppable. Any utility you want to use is going to be fine on your boots. Then next up we have our gems, our hearts, and our gear stats. For your weapons, you want critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. In your gear, you want damage reduction while fortified. Then the hearts we're using is first going to be Barber, which is going to be the most important. As we went over, now all of our lucky hit and other effects will work correctly with this. And how the Barber works is when you critically strike an enemy, it starts building up all subsequent damage you deal to that enemy into this Barber effect. And this effect will last a certain duration, mine's 3.9 seconds. And all of that built up damage will then explode in an AoE if that enemy dies or at the end of the duration. And that explosion of AoE damage is also a guaranteed crit, and it's multiplied by the roll you have on your item. So let's say, as an example, you have a Barber heart that lasts 4 seconds, and it has the same roll as mine, where it's going to multiply the damage by 14% for every second. So that means if that enemy survives a full 4 seconds, it would multiply all the damage you dealt to them by 56%. So just a massive damage increase, and it causes all that damage to be an AoE. So it not only is incredibly strong for single target, but it just makes all of your single target damage also be an AoE. So if there was, say, 2 enemies next to each other, all the AoE damage you did to one of them would be multiplied to both of them, meaning you're just going to be able to insta-kill full groups of enemies very quickly. Now, what also synergizes very well with that is our second heart. You pull up to 50 distant enemies while you're in your ultimate. So now when we Grizzly Rage, which we're going to be in majority of the time, we're going to be pulling all the enemies together next to us, and then we're going to damage them. They're all going to blow up from the Barber, insta-killing basically everything. Then our third heart is 20% of the damage you take is instead suppressed. When we use a defensive, all that suppressed damage is blown up. This damage really doesn't matter, doesn't do much damage at all, but this is just 20% damage reduction. And then next up, we have our stats. Now on our chest piece, you want just all damage reductions. Damage reduction from distant, from close, from poison, from fortified, max life, or total armor. All really good rolls. If you want more of a speed farming build, you can use the Mad Wolf's Glee unique item, but if you're doing much higher content and you need the survivability, you need a legendary chest piece. Then on our gloves, Ranks of Tornado, Lucky Chance, Attack Speed, Critical Strike Chance, gonna be the best rolls you can get. Then on our legs, you want all damage reduction again. Damage reduction from distant, from close, from poisoned, or from fortified, but one of the best rolls you want is damage reduction while injured. This is a damage reduction roll that was not nerfed, so as you can see here, I have 42% damage reduction while injured. So once you get 35% life or below, this massive damage reduction, this will help you stay alive in higher content because you're taking so much damage, and when you get CC'd, this will keep you alive for quite a long time. Then on our boots, spear cost reduction, dodge chance from distant, or just dodge chance, movement speed, and then another damage reduction while injured roll. So just from our boots and our legs, we have over 80% damage reduction while injured, which when you're low will just give you massive damage reduction. Then on our weapon, vulnerable damage, damage to slowed, willpower, core skill damage. Good rolls. I would want the damage to slowed to be changed to probably critical strike damage. Then our offhand, we have cooldown reduction, lucky hit, damage reduction by fortified, and spirit cost reduction. And if you want more damage reduction, you can change one of these rolls, probably spirit cost reduction, to damage reduction from poisoned. Then on our necklace, we have ranks to envenom, spirit cost reduction, damage reduction from poisoned, and movement speed. And if you want to be much more tanky, I would probably say remove the ranks to envenom and get damage reduction while fortified. Then on your rings, you want critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, max life, and either critical strike damage or vulnerable damage. But that's the entirety of the updated tornado build for the Druid. And this is probably the strongest version we've seen of this build. It's definitely stronger than any version of this build pre-season. Even with all those big nerfs, this is just so much stronger now that the Barber works correctly. And this build will be able to do Nightmare 100s or Lilith. If that's stuff you want to do, you're definitely going to want to be more tanky. You'll probably want to change up your Paragon board to get more defensives, and you'll probably want to more optimize defensive stats from your gear, because the damage of this build is absolutely ridiculous. Going up into the higher content, your damage does not matter using this build, especially with the Barber. All that matters is your defensives. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
wait a moment. I must wait a moment.